Hi, I'm Ron Wilkie, and I am your cybersecurity quarterback. This week we are talking about managing an access control project. I believe to be a CSQB cybersecurity quarterback, you need to have skills of a project manager or be a PMP, and cybersecurity and risk knowledge and history of doing cybersecurity and risk projects. Therefore, I've created these series of videos to help you with that information, that history, that knowledge that I've gained, and help you manage a cybersecurity and risk project, because I believe it's totally different than just managing an infrastructure or application development project. Obviously, you need to plan, build, test, and deploy your project. But also in cybersecurity, there's a life cycle of maintaining the solution that's usually considered an operation in most cases, but I put it here because auditing is really important as it relates to a cybersecurity solution. So the first thing you always need to do when you are building your solution is to produce your scope. And you know this, if you're a project manager, or even if you aren't, if you managed any type of endeavor, you need to know what you're doing. So that's your scope. Very basic. And so in a cybersecurity project, your scope should always center around these three things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You need to know these things. You need to know that your product or your solution is going to enable the confidentiality of data. It's going to make sure that the data is maintained and has not been altered fraudulently, and it's going to be available. You need your data available. When it's needed, it should be available. The CIA, the Triad, as they call it in cybersecurity. So with that in mind, your scope should always include these things: security, reliability. We just talked about security. Reliability means that it works. Transparency is not so much in your face that you can't do your job. The security does not prevent you from doing your job. It's transparent. Scalable, it grows with your company. Maintainability, you can maintain it. You can look at it, you can grow it, you can update it, you can patch it. So many times we have solutions that are now outdated and is no longer maintained by the manufacturer. So now is vulnerable to viruses and attacks and vulnerabilities rather. So you want to make sure it's maintainable. Auditability, you can audit it. It has logs, so you can look at it. Integrity, the information stays the same as it should be when it's accessed as when it was put into the database. And authenticity is that basically it's authenticated in the fact that once the person has been identified, it can be used to authenticate a user. These are basic things that your project or solution, if it's an access control project in cybersecurity and risk or InfoSec, it should do these things. It's built into your scope, and it should also be part of your requirements. Basic. So look at these things on the screen, and if your solution does not use these things, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things, then your solution is doomed to fail in the future. Now, it may work now, and maybe that's all you want, is a cheap solution that can do 3 or 4 of these things. But long term, you need your solution to do all 8 of these things. So when you're building your scope and requirements, make sure you have these things in mind. And if it's not, if your key stakeholders don't want these things, all of these things in the solution, at least you can warn them of the risk of not having these items or the solution not addressing these items. So you also need to know what type of solution you are producing. Now, these first couple of slides are the basic foundations of your cybersecurity projects or your InfoSec projects. You need to know whether or not your solution is a deterrent, if it keeps people out just by it being in place. Is it a preventative, like it actually keeps people out? For instance, your firewall will actually filter out certain IPs or MAC addresses to keep people from accessing certain data. Detective, does it actually detect something that's taking place on your network or computer? Corrective, does it correct a problem? Compensating, are you adding to a control, which is something to prevent something or detect something from happening? Are you adding to it another layer of security? So for instance, if you have a fence and the fence is only 6 feet high, and it should be 8, by the way, but let's say it's only 6 feet, and you add light, because most people don't want to try and break into a building if it's properly lit. That would be a compensating control. Recovery, for instance, if something goes wrong and you have a process in place to recover from your operating system going down, or your system going down, what do you do to recover? So is this a recovery type of project or solution, or directive? Directive basically tells people what to do. A directive solution will tell someone to enter in your password or enter in this information. It's directing you to do something. Again, so you need to know what type of solution you are implementing, because that will dictate some of the rules that you use when you are implementing or when you're basically honestly planning your solution, because you don't implement anything you don't plan. That's what you should be doing, right? Okay, you implement what you plan. You don't add to your scope unless it's one of these things that are going to increase your security, and then you should have a methodology for doing that, a plan, change control to your project that's signed off by all of your key stakeholders. All right, okay, so let's move forward. So who are your key stakeholders? So when I mentioned key stakeholders previously, I was talking about your sponsors, your owners. But when it relates to you actually doing your solution, it's more so your users. Why do I say that? Because you need to determine who your users are when it relates to accessing your network or your system. And when you know who your users are, you should determine their roles. Are they admins? And I'll get into this a little bit later. Are they contractors? Are they interns? Are they accessing your network via a web interface or a web application? Are they on site? I mean, who are these people? Then your rules around those individuals, such as your employees, or what type of employees, what type of access does this employee have, and the resources that they are going to access. So you need to know who your users are, what roles they have, the rules for those roles, and what are they accessing. This is basic stuff that you need to know. It's taken me, years and time and a lot of study to get this presentation together for you, so that you don't have to go through the things I went through to learn these important processes for implementing a cybersecurity solution. And basically, this is what I just mentioned. Who are your users? Defining your users. Are they admins, employees, interns, contractors, guests? Are they accessing your system via the web app, clients of your web application, or are they admins of the web apps? All right, so let's talk about your roles. You have least privilege, so the least amount of privilege for someone to do their projects, or to access their data. I'm thinking about projects because you are the project manager, but the users who are actually using the solution, the least amount of privilege they need to access the data that they need to do their jobs. Need to know. So basically, the information that they only need to know to do their job. Very similar to least privilege, but this is more scrutiny or more scrutinized, that they only get the information that they need to know. And sometimes that's different than your least privilege. Special authorization, and that's a little bit more like need to know. So I may have my least privilege may only get me to level 1, but because I am working on a particular project, then I might need special authorization to get access to a particular file during the time of doing this particular project. And security domains, those are groups that may have access to certain resources. So this group or this domain will have access to this object or these objects, or these objects may be provisioned to have access to other objects. These groups of objects will then be subjects and have access to other objects. So those are your security domains. Resources. Your resources need to be classified. So at certain organizations, certain companies, you're going to have different types of classifications. It could be, if you're in government, top secret. In corporate America, it could be private. It could be whatever, level A, B, and C. But as long as you classify your resources, let's say a database, you classify it as top secret, then those roles that have access to top secret will then be provisioned to have access in an automated process. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So types of projects that this relates to, as it relates to cybersecurity projects, is not just your network or your system, but it's also your physical perimeter. Let's say you have a location with data servers inside of it. Your physical security, your fence, your doors, your locks, your access to the information, to the physical servers, your database, I mentioned that, your system, software, and transactional software as well. So in the last slide to the left, you see I say the system should be IAAA. Well, what is IAAA? Identification, authentication, authorization, and auditing. Identification, that's who you are, right? The system should identify who you are. Authenticate, you should be able to prove who you are. You may do this by having a PIN number or a badge or something of that nature. And that also could be your identification. In that regard, then you will have a different type of authentication. And then you will be authorized to do whatever it is you need to do, such as access your bank account or access a particular file. And auditing is basically knowing that you have access to something by looking at the logs. So this person accessed this file on this date. So in case of a breach or something fraudulent, you have the logs to actually be able to go back and look at to determine what happened, if it indeed happened, or if we have record of it happening. So this is really important as it relates to project planning of an access control or access management project. You have administrative, right? Technical, logical, physical. So your administrative aspect to this means that it should come from a policy. It should come from your senior leadership or your C-levels. So it should always be coming from top down and not from the bottom up. You should always get your direction from the top. And usually it's driven by having a policy, and then your solution should implement or help promote that policy. So if you have a policy that you should have 7 digits in your password, then that policy should be, that solution should adhere to that policy, and that access management control should dictate that you have 7 digits in your password. Physical. So your technical solution is that software. Your physical solution should be something as it relates to having access to the system that houses that data, which backs up that policy. And that's the physical aspect of your access control. So I only have one slide for this, but it's very important. Everything comes from the top. That's what you really should memorize as it relates to planning your project. Your scope, like I mentioned, your key stakeholders as it relates to your sponsors should come from the top.